Hi and welcome to At the Wheel. I'm at the wheel of a new Renault. This is the new Renault Megane Sport Tourer and it is a hybrid. This is their E-Tech launch event here in the UK, and I'm going to be driving both the Megane, the new Clio and the new Captur. Now, the Clio is the odd one out there because that is the only one that isn't a plug-in hybrid. There's a lot new with these cars. Specifically, their engines, the hybrid motors that also help power them, and their gearboxes. Now, starting with the engines, all three of them have the same 1.6 litre 4-cylinder, and it's naturally aspirated. You also get two electric motors, a sort of beefy starter generator motor, and then a second proper E-motor, as Renault call it, which is the full-fat hybrid motor that powers you along. Now, in the Megane and the Captur, that engine and motor configuration with the 9.8 kilowatt-hour battery that sits under the rear seats gives you 160 horsepower, which for the size of cars, especially in the Captur, is actually quite good. In the Clio, because it has a much smaller, lower voltage, 230 volts instead of 400 battery, a 1.2 kilowatt-hour battery instead of 9.8, you get only 140 horsepower. Although in a Clio, that's actually very good. Now, in both the Captur and the Megane, you can drive it in EV only mode, which I believe is what I'm doing now, at up to 84 to 87 miles an hour. In the Clio, you can only drive it up to 37, and in the Clio, the range for that is only, I think, 2.5 miles, whereas for these, it's more like 30 miles in EV only mode. The car I'm driving is the RS line Megane, which is the slightly upgraded one. This one costs around about £31,000 to £32,000, and that is, like I said, with the 1.6 litre twin motor hybrid. Now, if you know me, you know that I do prefer estates. I have a 2013 Audi S4 Avant myself, and so this one is possibly the most interesting model that's on show for me today, and I do quite like it. The new RS line seats are very nice. They're Alcantara leather, or Alcantara fabric, and they're very comfortable. They're quite tight on me, and I'm relatively wide as a wide-shouldered person, and so they're a little bit tight for me, but I can imagine that if you were to drive this spiritedly, you could have a pretty good time with it. Now, like I said, the other thing that's new about these cars is their gearboxes. These have clutchless, non-synchro automatic gearboxes. It's actually a 5-speed with 3 speeds for the electric motor, technically making it a 15-speed, as they like to say, and it's remarkably smooth. Despite being a clutchless gearbox and having no synchros, it's incredibly smooth to row through the gears. You basically don't know that it's in any gear at all, and actually there's no way of telling. It doesn't tell you what gear you're in, there's no way to select an individual gear, but they do have a new mode. It's called B mode, and it's essentially their one-pedal driving, gearbox mode. It means that you can let off on the gearbox or let off on the accelerator, and much like a full EV, it will basically come to a full stop. It'll come to a stop at 4 miles an hour, and then all you need to do is use the accelerator pedal or the brake pedal to bring yourself to a final stop, which means especially in traffic and around town, it's super easy to drive. Now, I'm in full EV mode here, and that makes it a very comfortable and easy driving experience around town, just pottering to the shops or taking the kids to school. Like I said, you have about 30 miles of EV only range here, which is plenty for most journeys. If you then want to do longer journeys, motorway trips, then you have an incredible over 200 mile to the gallon WLTP cycle figure, which is honestly incredible. Considering, like I said, I drive an Audi S4, that's a V6 supercharged 3 litre, and I get maybe 30, 35. So to be driving at the same sort of on-road speeds and getting 200, yeah, it's pretty impressive. Now, it's not all about economy. This is a relatively quick car. Like I said, you get 160 brake horsepower combined from the electric motors and the 1.6 petrol, which is plenty for driving around, town and even getting up to speed on the motorways without much problem. The fact that it's a hybrid means that you have really good pickup off the line. It's super quick to say 0 to 30, for example, and be able to even just join up onto Joe Carriageways, motorways. you have no problems with this. When you put your foot down, it can be a little bit slow to react. This is something that I felt with the other cars as well, where the overall inputs that you have, the throttle, the brake, and the steering wheel, all feel just a little bit too disconnected for my personal taste. When you jam your foot down, it decides to change gears, and then after maybe a second or two, then you get the power, then you get to accelerate, which can be a little bit jarring when you just want to get out of some trouble or something like that. The brake pedal, I believe, is also brake by wire, which means that when you're coming to a stop, you can feel the modulation between it choosing the electric motors and the actual brakes, and can be a little bit strange or a bit of a learning curve to deal with. When it comes to the steering, it's an electric power steering rack, which means that you do get things like lane keep assist, and in this RS model you get adaptive brake or anti-collision braking and that kind of thing, but it does mean that it can be a little bit disconnected, a little bit floaty when driving, especially if you're driving it spiritedly. I'm in sport mode now and it feels just a little bit too light and a little bit too, disconnected from the wheels for a truly sporty feel, but it's very easy to drive, especially when you're basically at a standstill. It's incredibly light, it's easily a one-finger steering wheel, and makes it a very easy experience to drive, if not quite the most direct or the most fun. The Megane Sport Touring doesn't quite drive like a sports car as much as it does a comfortable family car with some quite tight-fitting bucket seats. It's still a good enough drive, and I think if you bought one, I don't think you'd be displeased, but if you're looking for a true sports car, I think it's probably obvious that this isn't quite it. Now, it does do a very good job of being a comfortable, and it does live up to the tourer part of its name, and I think if you're using this for longer journeys or just even the school run for the kids, I think you'd be pretty happy with it. So this is the new Clio. This is the hybrid E-Tech version with the 1.6 litre petrol 4-cylinder combined with 2 electric motors. Now the electric motors, one of them is effectively a hybrid starter generator, and the other one is the full fat electric motor. You'd also have a 1.2 kilowatt-hour battery just under the rear seats, which gives you an EV only range of I think 2.5 miles, not all that much, and the top speed in EV only mode is only 37 miles an hour, but thanks to the petrol engine as well, you get 140 brake horsepower. The driving feel of this is pretty much what you'd expect. When you put your foot down, it does actually go. It downshifts through its clutchless and actually synchronous dog box, which actually is incredibly smooth. It feels like a dual clutch. It feels like a very smooth, very easy to drive car. In terms of ride and handling, it's as comfortable as you could really want. The seats are pretty nice. These are the fabric ones, and overall the comfort is pretty good. It will come in a right-hand drive car. Obviously, I'm in a left-hand drive one, but this is one of the early samples before the press fleet and the production cars are made available. When it comes to the steering, it is incredibly, almost worryingly light at slow speeds, but when you start moving, and especially get up to more country speeds like I am now, it's a lot more usable, a lot more sensible. It's still pretty light, but there is a good weight to it, and you do have a reasonable amount of feel through the wheel too. As you might expect with a hybrid, this is an incredibly efficient car. This has a not full tank and under half battery left, and this quotes it as having a 590 kilometer range. That could very well easily be more like 800 kilometer range if everything was charged and full to the brim, but that's incredible for a car that is this small and this compact and this easy to drive and also powerful too. As for the infotainment system, it's pretty much what you'd expect. It's a touchscreen in the center of the dash. It's reasonably responsive. It's pretty easy to use. It did take a little bit of learning to get used to it, but it's a pretty simple thing to use as you'd expect, and has all of the features you'd expect too. As for space, there is plenty in here. Despite this being a super mini, it's not really anymore, but despite being a pretty small car, you do have enough room in the back for at least 2 fairly reasonable sized adults, plus a good amount of boot space too. And since this is a just standard hybrid rather than a plug-in hybrid, you don't have any extra charging cables, you don't have any extra fuel filler flaps for your Type 2 connectors. It's all just built in and packaged remarkably well. Now this is the new Captur. This is the E-Tech version, as with all of the cars we'll be driving today, and this one has the same 1.6 litre 4-cylinder petrol, but this one has 160 horsepower thanks to the upgraded battery that sits under the rear seats. That is a 9.8 kilowatt hour battery and means that you have a much more powerful motor arrangement since it's a higher voltage too. You also get a much better all-electric range of around 30 miles or so, and you can drive up to 87 or 84 miles an hour on EV only mode rather than the Clio's 37. Now because of this car's 160 horsepower, despite its higher weight than the Clio, it's actually pretty easy to drive. It does feel a bit heavier and you definitely feel a lot taller, sitting up high, but it's still a very easy car to drive. You still have electric power steering with all of the lane keep assists and that kind of thing, which means that you get a very easy, very light steering wheel at the standstill, but once you get moving, it gets a bit more weighted, a bit heavier, and a bit more feel through it too. Pulling off of the line, especially in EV mode, does give you a pretty good shunt. It's got a good amount of horsepower, and especially in the more sporty mode, it does pull pretty well. Of course, it's not a sports car, it's a family small SUV, but it does a very good job of being reasonably responsive and pretty comfortable feel, even if I do feel quite high and certainly a bit more of a rollover risk. When it comes to efficiency, as you might expect with this hybrid, it is incredibly efficient. This gets 188 miles to the gallon, which is incredible. I'm looking at my fuel tank, which isn't quite full, and I have 554 kilometers of range. That's impressive for a car this size and this relatively heavy, this sort of large in terms of it being an SUV as opposed to more like the Clio. But yeah, that's really good. In terms of comfort and space, you have plenty of room in the front. The sort of top of the roof does get in my way as I'm quite tall, but it's still pretty spacious, pretty airy. You do have the same touchscreen interface that is in the Clio and the Megane, and it's just a quite nice place to be. It's quite a nice driving feel overall. Of course, being an SUV, it does feel a bit more disconnected from the road. You do feel like the suspension is a bit more wallowy than the Clio's is, but it's still plenty fine to drive. And if this is just a family car, which let's face it is what it's meant for, I think is a good shout. One thing I would say is that the new clutchless and dog box gearbox, which is a very interesting way to do it, but I think they use the electric motor to help basically iron out the shifts here so that it's incredibly smooth, and it is very, very smooth. But the one thing that I would say is that while I've been driving actually all of these cars, the feeling that I get is that the accelerator pedal isn't intrinsically linked to how fast I'm going, unlike in a normal, especially in a manual car, where when you put your foot down, whatever the engine, however much power it has, that's how fast you go. But in this, because it will change gears, it changes its mind, it will switch from electric to petrol and that kind of thing, it feels a little more disconnected than a traditional car. Now that's not a terrible thing, and especially considering you can leave it in EV only mode, it's a very, very simple and very easy car to drive. Also, since this is in its B gearbox mode, or the B mode, that means you get effectively one pedal driving. When you lift off the accelerator, it slows the car down to 4 miles an hour, and then you can press the brake to come to a full stop. It's the same that's in the Clio and the Megane, and it's a very easy way to drive, especially around town. You can drive this in EV only mode for enough range that you can take the kids to school or do that shopping trip to Tesco and never need to use the petrol engine, never need to use any petrol. And if you are plugging it in at home, which Renault will offer a free BP ChargeMaster wall box to plug into your home, then you can basically leave it in EV only mode for the majority of your journeys. Now, my personal preference isn't for SUVs or even small SUVs like this one. If I wanted a large car, I would get an Estate, which is what I did. Check out my review of my S4, and we're going to be driving the Megane Sport Touring, which is much more up my road or my street than this is. But for the people who buy these, which this is apparently Renault's best-selling car in the UK, I think they've got a good option here. Now, of course, these are just my first impressions, so if you want to see a full review of any of these cars, let me know which ones or which one in the comments below, and I'll do my best to get hands on them so that I can test them out and see how they hold up in the real world rather than left-hand drive variants and for an hour at a time. So that's pretty much it from us at the wheel of these Renaults today. If you're interested in seeing more videos, I'm going to be checking out more cars, doing more content with my own and comparisons, how-tos, and a whole load of other stuff as well. So if you're interested in seeing more from me and at the wheel, then feel free to hit that subscribe button and the bell notification icon. I'd also love to hear your thoughts about these Renaults in the comments below. Are these something that you'd be interested in yourself or for a family member, or are they not quite for you? Would you prefer the, say, standard petrol models? Would you prefer a full EV, or would you prefer something a bit more sporty? Anything and all, do let me know in those comments down below. But otherwise, thanks for watching. I will leave some more videos on the end cards that you can check out, which will be over there. And that's pretty much it. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you all in the next video.